I want you to close your eyes for a second. Picture the absolute worst-case scenario you can possibly imagine. Not a personal problem, but a global one. A nightmare.
Okay.
It's 1943. The world is effectively on fire. The Second World War is at its absolute peak, and the outcome is totally, completely uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
And in this version of history, Adolf Hitler gets his hands on an atomic bomb before the Allies do.
It is a terrifying thought. I mean, it effectively changes everything. The map of the world, the history of the 20th century, the very definition of freedom, it all just evaporates in a mushroom cloud over London or Moscow or even Washington, D.C.
Exactly. It's the ultimate checkmate. And the crazy thing is, this wasn't just some paranoid fantasy from a pulp novel. It was a very real, very immediate possibility that people in London were losing sleep over.
Oh, absolutely. And the only thing standing between that nightmare and reality wasn't a massive army or a fleet of heavy bombers.
No, it was a handful of guys on skis.
11 men, to be precise.
11 men. In the middle of a frozen, hostile wasteland in occupied Norway, staring down a fortress filled with 3,000 Nazi troops.
Right.
It sounds like the plot of an action movie that's trying way too hard, you know? But this is real. This is Operation Gunnerside.
And what makes this story so compelling to me isn't just the odds, which were, well, frankly, suicidal. It's that this mission represents a pivotal moment in the history of warfare.
How so?
We see a shift here. It's the moment where we move from the idea that bigger is better, brute force, massive battalions, carpet bombing, to the realization that surgical precision, intelligence, and a small group of highly trained individuals can achieve what an entire army cannot.
The scalpel instead of the sledgehammer.
Exactly. This mission is the ancestor of modern special operations.
I am so ready to dive into this. We are looking at a really fascinating article today, the legendary Operation Gunnerside, by Jefferson Silva from Revista Sociedad Militar, published just recently.
A great source. Really lays out the timeline and the stakes.
It really does. And our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We are going to unpack how this small group of skiers managed to stop the Nazi nuclear program without firing a single shot.
And we're going to look at the immense pressure of that nuclear race. Because to understand why these men were on that mountain, risking absolutely everything, you have to understand the terror that was driving the Allied decisions in London and Washington.
So let's unpack this. We've got the stakes, Hitler with a nuke. That's the headline. But to get there, we really need to talk about the science. Now, I know physics usually makes people glaze over, but this is actually life or death stuff.
It really is. The entire operation hinges on a single scientific detail.
We're in the late 1930s. What is actually happening in the labs of Germany?
Well, the scientific context is absolutely crucial here. You can't understand the mission without understanding the atom. In the late 30s, specifically 1938, German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann discovered uranium fission.
The breakthrough.
The breakthrough. They realized that by splitting the uranium atom, you could release an amount of energy that was previously just theoretical. There's an unimaginable potential. Suddenly, the stuff of science fiction was on the table.
Right. It wasn't just about making cheap electricity or running a steam engine. The military applications were immediate and obvious. This was about making a weapon.
Precisely. The path from fission to a bomb is complex, but the Germans were arguably ahead of the curve at the very start. Werner Heisenberg, a Nobel laureate, was leading their program. They had the scientific talent. But here's the catch.
Okay.
To make this work, to create a nuclear reactor that can sustain a chain reaction, you need something called a moderator.
Okay, a moderator. I've heard this term thrown around in Oppenheimer and history books. Give me the non-textbook definition. What is it actually doing?
Think of it like this. Imagine you have a room full of mousetraps, and each one has a ping pong ball on it.
I'm with you, the classic demonstration.
Right. You throw one ball in, it sets off a trap, which launches its ball, which sets off two more traps, and so on. That's a chain reaction. Now, in a nuclear reactor, the uranium atoms are the mousetraps, and the neutrons are the ping pong balls.
Got it.
When you split one uranium atom, it shoots out more neutrons. But these neutrons are moving incredibly fast. They're too hot, too energetic.
Like a bullet.
Exactly. Like a bullet that's too fast to be caught. It just zips past the other uranium atoms without hitting them properly. So your chain reaction dies out almost instantly.
So you need speed bumps. You need to slow the ping pong balls down.
You need speed bumps. That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
You need a substance, a moderator, that the neutrons can pass through and bounce off of, losing just enough speed so they can be captured by the next uranium atom and cause it to split.
And what works as a speed bump?
Well, there are a couple options. The Americans, with the Manhattan Project, they eventually decided to use graphite as their moderator.
Like pencil lead.
Essentially, yes, but in an ultra-pure form. It's light, it's abundant. But the German scientists made a critical error early on, a famous history-altering mistake.
What was that?
They tested graphite, but their samples were impure. They had boron in them, which is like a neutron sponge. It just absorbs the neutrons instead of slowing them down. So their experiment failed.
And they concluded.
They concluded graphite didn't work. They wrote it off. So they placed their entire bet on the only other viable option they saw, a substance called heavy water.
Heavy water. It sounds like something from a sci-fi novel, or maybe a really intense energy drink, but it's a real liquid.
It is. Visually, it looks exactly like normal water. You could pour it in a glass, you couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah.
But chemically, it's distinct. Normal water is H2O2 hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom.
Right.
In heavy water, the regular hydrogen atoms are replaced by deuterium.
Deuterium.
It's a heavier isotope of hydrogen. See, a normal hydrogen atom has just a proton in its nucleus. Deuterium has a proton and a neutron. That makes it about twice as heavy.
And that extra neutron is what makes it a good moderator.
It makes it the best moderator.
Yeah.
It's incredibly efficient at slowing down neutrons without absorbing them. The Germans were convinced this was the key to their reactor. And without a functioning reactor, they couldn't produce the plutonium needed for a bomb.
So heavy water became the bottleneck. The entire Nazi atomic bomb program depended on getting enough of this specific, rare liquid.
The single point of failure.
And this brings us to our location. Because you can't just turn on a tap in Berlin and get heavy water. It's incredibly rare in nature. You need a specific kind of industrial facility to separate it. And the Nazis found the perfect one.
Vemork. It's in the Telemark region of Norway. It was originally a fertilizer plant built by Norsk Hydro, perched on the side of a steep, precipitous gorge, a real fortress of a building.
And why there? Why this specific spot in the middle of nowhere, Norway?
One reason: power. Massive amounts of cheap power. Producing heavy water is an incredibly energy-intensive process. You have to use electrolysis on a huge scale, running electricity through tons and tons of ordinary water to slowly separate out the heavier molecules.
And Vemork had the power source.
It sat right next to the Ujugan waterfall, one of the most powerful in Europe. It had its own massive hydroelectric power station. It was, at that time, the only place in the world capable of producing heavy water on an industrial scale.
So when the Nazis invaded Norway in 1940, they didn't just get a strategic position. They got the keys to the atom bomb.
That's what the Allies feared. They immediately ordered Norsk Hydro to increase heavy water production. The Allied calculation from that point on is pretty simple math.
Vemork produces heavy water. Hitler needs heavy water for the bomb.
Therefore, Vemork has to go. It became an absolute urgency, as the source puts it. The British Special Operations Executive, the SOE, Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, basically put a giant bullseye on this facility. They knew they had to stop the flow of this liquid.
If the heavy water kept flowing to Germany, the clock was ticking on a Nazi atomic weapon.
A clock they couldn't see, which is the terrifying part. They didn't know if the Germans were months away or years away. They had to assume the worst.
But wait, let's play devil's advocate here for a second. If it's just a factory, why not just bomb it? The RAF had bombers. The Americans were coming in with their B-17s. Why send in guys on skis? Why risk lives on the ground when you can drop TNT from 20,000 feet?
That is the exact question they debated in London. And it seems like the obvious solution. But there were two massive problems.
What were they?
One, the heavy water production facility wasn't just in the building, it was in the basement. A heavily reinforced concrete and steel sublevel. A conventional bombing raid in 1942, which wasn't very accurate to begin with, would probably just blow the roof off and leave the delicate electrolysis cells underground completely untouched.
So it wouldn't even work.
It likely wouldn't. But the second reason was the real killer, and it was a moral one.
Which one?
The plant also held huge, pressurized tanks of liquid ammonia for the fertilizer production.
Oh.
If a bombing raid ruptured those tanks, you would release a massive cloud of toxic gas that would pour down into the valley below. It would kill every man, woman, and child in the nearby town of Rjukan. The collateral damage was deemed completely unacceptable.
So bombing is out. It has to be sabotage. It has to be boots on the ground.
That's the only way.
And this is where the story gets tragic before it gets heroic, because Gunnerside, the success story, wasn't the first attempt, was it?
No, not at all. And this is a part of the history that often gets overshadowed by the later victory. Before we talk about the triumph, we have to talk about the abject failure and the tragedy. There were two precursors. The first was Operation Grouse.
Grouse, like the bird.
Yes, this was the advance team, 4 Norwegians from the SOE, parachuted in as scouts in October 1942. Their job was to infiltrate the area, map the routes, monitor the German garrison, and basically prepare the landing zone for a much larger attack force.
So they were the pathfinders.
Exactly. They were dropped onto the freezing Hardanger Plateau, this vast, desolate mountain wilderness, and they waited.
Just 4 guys waiting in the snow. I can't even imagine the isolation.
It was brutal. We were talking about one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth in winter. They were effectively living off the land. The source mentions they were eating reindeer moss, which is basically a lichen, and mixing it with oatmeal to survive.
That sounds grim.
To put it mildly. They managed to hunt a single reindeer at one point, and they ate everything, including the partially digested contents of its stomach, just to get the vitamins. That's the level of survival we're talking about. And all they could do was wait for the cavalry.
And the cavalry was supposed to be Operation Freshman.
Operation Freshman, November 19th, 1942. And this was the complete opposite of the later Gunnerside approach. This was the brute force attempt.
The sledgehammer.
The sledgehammer. The plan was to use 2 huge Horsa gliders, towed by Halifax bombers, to transport about 30 British combat engineers, Royal Engineers, right under the frozen lake near the plant.
Gliders. I mean, that just feels so incredibly risky. Silent, yes, but so vulnerable.
They were. It was an assault strategy. They were supposed to land, storm the facility with overwhelming force, blow it up, and then try to fight their way out to the Swedish border.
A D-Day style assault, but on a much smaller and colder scale.
Right. But the weather in Norway is a formidable enemy, sometimes worse than the Wehrmacht. A severe storm hit during their flight across the North Sea. The icing on the gliders and the towing cables became too heavy.
The cables snapped?
The tow rope on one of the gliders snapped. That glider crashed. The Halifax bomber towing the second glider, its navigation equipment failing in the storm, ended up crashing into a mountain. The second glider crash-landed nearby.
A total catastrophe. And the survivors, I remember reading this in the source, and it just turns your stomach. Because you expect, okay, crash landing, they get captured, they're prisoners of war. But that's not what happened here.
No, it's horrific. The survivors of the crashes, injured, dazed, freezing, were rounded up by the Wehrmacht. But they were not treated as prisoners of war. They were handed over to the Gestapo.
Because of Hitler's commando order.
Yes, the Kommando Befehl. A secret directive issued by Hitler himself that stated that any Allied commando, saboteur, or agent found behind enemy lines, regardless of whether they were in uniform or not, was to be slaughtered to the last man. No trial, no POW camps, just immediate execution.
So the survivors of the crash, men who should have been protected by the Geneva Convention.
They were interrogated, tortured, and then executed. Some were shot, some were poisoned by injection, all of them. 34 Allied servicemen died in Operation Freshman. It was a complete and utter disaster.
So put yourself in the shoes of the Allied commanders back in London. You've just lost 34 men. You've failed spectacularly to destroy the target.
And arguably worse, the element of surprise is completely gone. The Nazis aren't stupid. They found maps and equipment in the wreckage. They now know for a fact that the Allies are coming for the heavy water.
The plant is on high alert.
Highest alert. They immediately tightened security. They flooded the area with thousands of troops. They laid minefields on the approaches and the hillsides. They put up more barbed wire. They installed massive floodlights on the facility that kept it lit up 247. The mission went from difficult to, on paper, theoretically impossible.
Any sane person would have scrubbed the mission right there, called it a loss, and moved on.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But the Grouse team, those 4 scouts on the plateau, they didn't leave.
Unbelievable.
No, they stayed in the mountains. They survived that brutal winter, hiding, listening, communicating by radio, telling London, we are still here. We are still watching.
That resilience is it's hard to fathom. And it's that resilience that allowed the British to make a pivot, right? They realized sending in a big force with gliders was a death sentence. They needed something different.
They realized they couldn't bludgeon their way in. They had to sneak in. They had to be ghosts. So they abandoned the frontal assault strategy and decided on a silent, clandestine infiltration. A surgical strike.
Enter Operation Gunnerside.
The new plan. It was to send in 6 more highly trained Norwegian commandos to link up with the 4 survivors of Grouse. A team of 10, which eventually grew to 11. These weren't just soldiers. These were men who grew up on skis. They knew the snow. They knew the mountains. They were born to this environment.
And leading this new team is a guy named Joachim Rønneberg. What a character.
Rønneberg is fascinating. He was young, only 23 years old at the time. He had fled Norway after the invasion and joined the SOE in Britain. He was an instructor in sabotage and demolition. He was an expert.
But here is the detail from the source that always just blows my mind. He didn't know why he was going.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Wait, really? He's leading a suicide mission, arguably the most important mission of the war, and he doesn't know the full objective.
He knew the target. He knew he had to destroy the heavy water inventory in the production cells. But he revealed much later in life that they were never told about atomic bombs. He had no idea about nuclear physics or the potential end of the world. He was just told that stopping this production was of the utmost importance to the Allied war effort.
That is just wild. Go blow up this water factory. Why? Don't worry about it. Just trust us. It's really, really important.
It speaks to the discipline and the trust of that era. But they absolutely knew the risks. They knew all about freshmen. They knew about the executions. The planning phase for Gunnerside was incredibly short, less than 3 months. They had to memorize maps, plan multiple routes, and prepare for an escape that seemed just as impossible as the entry.
And let's talk about the suicide pills, because nothing says low probability of survival, like your commanding officer handing you a cyanide capsule before you leave.
It was standard issue for this mission, a grim necessity. They knew that if they were caught, there would be no bargaining. The Gestapo would torture them for information on the resistance and their contacts, and then kill them. The pills were a grim mercy. They had to be prepared to take their own lives rather than be captured.
There's a quote from Colonel Leif Tronstad, the brilliant Norwegian scientist and planner of the mission, who actually helped design and build Vemork originally, right?
That's right. He knew the plant's layout from memory. The perfect man for the job.
Tronstad told the men right before they left, if you succeed, this will live in Norway's memory for 100 years.
No pressure at all.
Right, just the weight of a century of national history on your shoulders. So, February 27, 1943, D-Day. They deploy.
They parachute in. And initially, the conditions were good, a clear night. But, as is typical for the Hardanger Plateau, the weather turned instantly. They landed in the middle of a raging blizzard.
Which sounds awful. Being in a blizzard is usually a negative. But the source says something interesting. The bad weather was actually their ally.
It's one of the great ironies of special operations. What makes your life miserable also makes the enemy complacent. The blizzard covered their tracks immediately. It kept the German patrols huddled inside their barracks. I mean, who wants to be out walking the perimeter in a whiteout with zero visibility?
It was their cloak of invisibility.
It was. The storm that could have killed them also protected them.
So they land, they link up with the 4 Grouse team members. And I just have to picture this meeting. The Grouse guys have been living like cavemen for months. They are probably gaunt, they smell like reindeer blood and wood smoke.
And here come the fresh guys from England with, chocolate and proper rations and cigarettes. It must have been an incredibly emotional reunion. But they didn't have time to celebrate. They had to move. They skied for several days towards Vemork. And when they finally got to the edge of the gorge, they saw the target.
Describe the geography for us, because fortress is a word we use a lot. But this place was physically, geographically daunting.
It's hard to overstate. Imagine a castle built on a precipice. The plant is built on a narrow shelf of rock. Below it is a deep, sheer ravine, a gorge hundreds of feet deep, with a frozen river, the Mamana, at the bottom. Above the plant are mountains going up thousands of feet.
And the only easy way in.
The only way in, the obvious way, is a single narrow suspension bridge spanning the ravine, leading directly to the plant's main gate.
Which obviously is swarming with Nazis.
It's heavily guarded. 2 guards on the bridge at all times, machine gun nests covering both ends, searchlights, everything. Attempting to cross that bridge would have been suicide.
Yeah.
It was a kill zone.
So Rønneberg looks at the map, he looks at the bridge, and he says, nope, we're going the hard way.
The impossible way. The way the Germans thought no one would ever be insane enough to try. The plan was to descend into the bottom of the ravine, which is a sheer drop of hundreds of feet, cross the freezing river, and then climb the sheer rock and ice wall on the other side to reach a railway line that ran into the plant.
Can we just pause on that for a second? Climbing a rock wall in the middle of the night, in February, in Norway, in a blizzard, carrying 50 pounds of explosives and gear.
And heavy winter clothing. And weapons. And they couldn't use ropes for most of it because it would take too long and might leave evidence. It is a physical feat that is just hard to comprehend.
I'm trying to imagine the sound, or really the lack of it.
The wind howling, the crunch of your boots on snow which carries in the cold air, the sound of your own breathing. One slip, and you fall into the darkness. If a rock comes loose and clatters down the cliff, the noise could alert the guards just a few hundred feet above you. The mission is over.
I get vertigo just thinking about it, but they do it. They scale this wall and they reach the railway tracks. Now they're on the same level as the plant.
They are inside the outer perimeter, but they still have to get into the building itself. They crawled along the tracks. They used the guard schedules. Intelligence gathered patiently for months by the grouse team to time their movements perfectly. They watched the sentries turn their backs and they sprinted across the open ground to the shadow of the main building.
Now they need an entry point. The main doors are locked and guarded, so where do they go?
Colonel Tronstad, the planner, knew the plant's layout intimately. He told them about a tunnel, a small, narrow cable tunnel used for wiring and pipes. It was cramped, filled with machinery, but it led from outside directly into the basement levels, bypassing all the main guarded doors.
So they have to find this tunnel.
They find the hatch, and they used simple bolt cutters to snip the padlock on the chain holding it shut.
I love this detail. They aren't kicking down doors or using C4 to blow the wall. They're quietly snipping padlocks in the dark. It's so subtle.
Stealth was absolutely paramount. If the alarm goes off before the charges are set, the mission fails, and they all die. They crawled through this dark, narrow tunnel, and they emerged inside the heavy water storage sector, the heart of the target, without triggering a single alarm.
So they're in. This is it. The belly of the beast. And the team splits up to cover more ground.
Yes, Rønneberg and his partner, Birger Kaiser, enter the target room itself, the high concentration room. Other team members are securing the perimeter or finding other entry points, and this is where the tension spikes to an insane level. Rønneberg is on his hands and knees, setting the charges.
What kind of charges were they?
They were shaped charges, like explosive sausages, essentially. Plastic explosives designed to direct the blast in a specific direction. He was placing them directly on the delicate stainless steel heavy water cells.
And then CR Ash.
A window smashes somewhere in the building.
If that were me, my heart would have exploded right there. Game over. You're caught.
It was a moment of pure, abject panic. Rønneberg spun around with his Sten gun raised. Kaiser froze. They thought they were busted. They thought a guard had seen them.
But it wasn't a guard?
No. It turned out it was just the other members of their own team. They couldn't find the cable tunnel entrance in the dark, got impatient, and decided to just smash a window to get in and help.
Talk about high-stakes communication breakdown. Hey, guys, just breaking in.
Rønneberg, to his immense credit, kept his cool. They verified it was their own men, and they went back to work, their hearts still pounding. But they weren't alone in that room.
The caretaker.
Right. There was a Norwegian civilian working the night shift, a single watchman. Suddenly he walks in, and he's surrounded by camouflaged men with guns, placing explosives all over the machinery. He must have been terrified out of his mind.
And this is where we get one of those incredible, almost absurd human moments in the middle of all this tension. Rønneberg doesn't knock him out. He doesn't tie him up and gag him.
No. He calmly reassures him, tells him they are Norwegian patriots and he won't be harmed. And then the caretaker, in the middle of this panic, realizes he's lost his glasses. He can't see without them.
In the middle of a sabotage mission with a 2-minute fuse about to be lit?
Yes. And Rønneberg actually stops what he's doing and helps the man find his glasses on the floor, because he knew that in occupied Norway, getting a new pair of glasses was almost impossible. It's this tiny moment of absurd humanity in the middle of potential world-altering destruction.
That's incredible. And then Rønneberg gives him a specific instruction.
Yes. He tells him to run upstairs, and then he says, and keep your mouth open.
Keep your mouth open. Why?
It's physics again. He knew the explosion would create a massive shockwave in that confined concrete space. The overpressure. If your mouth is closed, that pressure differential can instantly rupture your eardrums. By keeping your mouth open, you equalize the pressure between your inner ear and the outside air.
That is just incredible presence of mind. You're blowing up a top-secret Nazi facility, risking your life, but you take a second to save a civilian's hearing.
And it worked. The source notes that Rønneberg actually met the man by chance 2 years later after the war was over, and the man's hearing was perfectly fine.
Amazing. Okay, so the caretaker is safe, glass is on, charges are set, fuse is lit. They have to get out fast.
They used a very short fuse, about 2 minutes, maybe even less.
Yeah.
They needed just enough time to get out of the room and down the stairs, but not enough time for any guard who might find the bombs to react and toss them out. The charges detonated. It wasn't a huge Hollywood fireball that leveled the mountain.
Yeah.
It was a contained, precise, almost muffled thud that echoed through the plant. It was the sound of the complete destruction of the electrolysis chamber.
And all the heavy water.
The entire inventory, months and months of priceless production poured out onto the floor and down the drains. Gone.
And the Germans, what was their reaction?
That's the beauty of it. The masterstroke of the plan. The explosion was muffled by the thick concrete walls of the basement. The noise was heard, sure, but it didn't immediately scream attack to the guards outside in the blizzard.
They didn't know what it was.
They were confused. They thought maybe it was a landmine detonating under the snow, or a generator backfiring, or a piece of machinery failing. The confusion bought the commandos precious minutes.
By the time the German sentries realized what had happened, that the facility was compromised and the alarm was finally raised,
the commandos were gone, vanished, ghosts in the night.
leaving behind one pair of bolt cutters.
That's it. The only piece of Allied equipment left behind. A deliberate message.
And the most important detail of all.
0 shots fired. They didn't kill a single German soldier. They destroyed the target and vanished back into the blizzard the same way they came.
But the mission isn't over. Getting in is one thing. Getting out is another. Now they have the entire German army in Norway looking for them.
This is the escape phase, and it is just as harrowing as the infiltration. They went back down the ravine. Imagine sliding down into that dark gorge again. Only this time you know that at any second the spotlights could swing onto you and machine guns will open up.
And then the ski trip from hell begins.
They had to ski all the way to Sweden. Sweden was neutral territory, but it was hundreds of miles away, about 250 miles across the mountains, in the dead of winter.
And the Germans were in hot pursuit.
A massive manhunt was launched. They had thousands of troops sweeping the plateau. But again, the weather saved them. The Germans couldn't use their aircraft effectively to spot the skiers because of the continuing storms, and the commandos were simply better skiers. They were experts in their element, and they outpaced the German pursuit.
And all 11 of them made it out.
All of them. The team split up. Some stayed behind in Norway to help the resistance, but the main group skied for 2 weeks to reach Sweden. 0 casualties. It's almost statistically impossible for a raid of this magnitude and risk to have a 100% success rate with 0 losses.
That is. I mean, you can see why they made a movie about this with Kirk Douglas, The Heroes of Telemark. The story is almost too perfect to be true.
It is, but it happened.
So let's zoom out a bit. We've got the explosion, the successful escape. What was the actual strategic impact? Did they stop the bomb for good?
This is where we have to look at the broader picture.
Yeah.
The immediate effect was a complete and total success. The sabotage destroyed the entire existing stock of heavy water and critically damaged the production equipment. It single-handedly delayed the German nuclear program by many months, perhaps even a year.
But the Germans didn't give up, right? They rebuilt the facility.
They did. They poured enormous resources into repairing the plant. Production eventually resumed, though it never reached its previous levels. And later in the war, the Allies had to resort to those massive bombing raids we discussed earlier to try and finish the job.
Which were less effective.
Much less effective. And they did cause significant civilian casualties, which was the tragedy they tried to avoid. And eventually the final act was the SOE sinking the ferry, the SF Hydro, that was transporting the last remaining heavy water stocks across Lake Tyn.
So some people might ask, if the Germans rebuilt, and if, as we found out after the war, the German scientists were actually way behind in their research anyway, does that make the Gunnerside mission less heroic or less important?
It's a valid question, but the answer is a definitive no. You have to evaluate the mission based on what they knew at the time.
The fog of war.
The absolute fog of war. The Allies didn't know the German scientists were struggling with reactor design. They didn't know the Germans lacked the industrial capacity to build a bomb quickly. All they knew was this: Hitler wants this water. If he gets enough of it, he could win the war.
So they didn't stop the program cold, but they bought time.
They bought the most valuable commodity in wartime. Critical time. Think about the timeline. The U.S. Trinity test, the first successful atomic bomb detonation, happened in July 1945. The war in Europe had already ended in May 1945. It was a photo finish.
Wow.
If the Germans had had unchecked access to heavy water 2 or 3 years earlier, could they have accelerated their program? Could they have built a crude but functional reactor? Could they have built a dirty bomb to poison London?
Even a rudimentary device would have changed the entire course of history.
Precisely. If London had been hit with even a small nuclear device in 1944, the D-Day invasion might never have happened. The war could have dragged on for years or ended in a terrifying stalemate. Operation Gunnerside was the insurance policy that ensured that didn't happen.
And Rønneberg, the leader, He had a chilling realization about this later in his life, didn't he?
He did. He lived a long life, became a celebrated national hero in Norway. But he said he only truly understood the magnitude of what they had done after he heard the news reports about Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945.
When the rest of the world finally saw what an atomic bomb could actually do.
Yes. He saw the images of the devastation, the cities wiped off the map, and he had this chilling thought. Without our mission, London could have ended up looking like Hiroshima. That was the weight he carried for the rest of his life.
It puts the whole didn't know what the mission was for thing into a crazy new perspective. He was saving London, saving the free world, and he thought he was just blowing up some chemical tanks in his homeland.
It highlights the incredible trust involved. He trusted his commanders. He trusted that the thing they were destroying was worth their lives, even without knowing the ultimate stakes.
We mentioned the movie earlier, but beyond Hollywood, what is the lasting military legacy of this? You mentioned earlier that it was a shift in how we fight wars.
Gunnerside is the textbook definition of a force multiplier. Before this, the prevailing military logic was that to destroy a large fortified factory, you send 500 bombers. You accept that you will lose 20 planes and 100 men, and you still might miss the target.
Brute force.
Yeah.
An acceptable level of attrition.
Here, they sent 11 men. They lost 0. And they hit the most critical part of the target with 100% accuracy. It proved, in the most dramatic way possible, that a small, highly intelligent, highly trained, and well-equipped unit could achieve strategic results that an entire army division could not.
It really is the birth of the modern special forces ethos.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It paved the way for the SS, the Navy SEALs, all of them. It's the philosophy of the surgical strike that defines so much of modern conflict.
Intelligence over mass. Precision over power.
And logistics. We can't forget the logistics. Skiing hundreds of miles, surviving in the snow, the perfect timing of the guard changes. It wasn't just bravery, it was profound competence.
It's a story that has everything. Science, spies, danger, incredible physical feats, skiing. It's got it all.
And it serves as a powerful reminder of how fragile history is. We look back now and we think the Allied victory was inevitable. It wasn't. It hinged on moments like this. A few degrees colder, a guard turning his head at the wrong moment, a single slip on the rock face. And the world we live in today would be completely unrecognizable.
That is a heavy thought to end on.
It is. The margins were that thin.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Operation Gunnerside, let's just recap the journey. We went from the terrified labs of Allied scientists fearing a Nazi nuke to the terrible tragedies of Operation Freshman to the sheer grit and courage of those Norwegians climbing a cliff in the dark.
We saw how 11 men on skis stopped a massive industrial machine. It's the ultimate David versus Goliath story, but with explosives and better winter gear.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought to mull over. We live in an age where we are obsessed with information. We want to know everything instantly. We track our packages. We Google every question that pops into our heads.
We crave certainty. We want to know the outcome before we even start.
Exactly. But Joachim Rønneberg and his team, they climbed that cliff into the absolute unknown. They carried cyanide pills for a mission whose ultimate purpose they didn't fully understand. They just trusted that their sacrifice would mean something without needing to know the why.
And that raises a really interesting question. In our world of information overload, could we summon that kind of blind trust today? Could we, as individuals or as a society, walk into the dark, trusting that it's for the greater good, without having all the answers fed to us on a screen?
Something to think about next time you're hesitating to do something important just because you don't know the full outcome. Sometimes you just have to trust the mission and climb the cliff.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.
Goodbye.